Chapter 15. When I look at how honor in the eye. By the 2006, they were a distinct Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde-like quality to Angelo Mosillo. The good Angelo had been warning for surprisingly long time to the industry what was heading into a dangerous territory. I'm deeply concerned about credit quality and the overall industry, he said in the spring of 2005. I think that the amount of capacity that been developed for subprime is much greater than the quality of subprime loans available. A year later, he said to the group of analysts, I believe there are a lot of fraud in state-econ loans. And he flatly chose CNBC. Maria Bartiromo that a housing recession was on the way. I would expect a general decline on 5% and 10% throughout the country. Some areas 20%. In areas where you have heavy speculation, you could have 30%, he said. The bad Angelo insists that none of this would be a problem for Countrywide. Countrywide wasn't just some fly-by-night, some prime lender, it was American #1 loan lender. Mosillo and other executives repeatedly stressed the high standard to the Countrywide used to make in mortgage. Countrywide proprietary technology will help it avoid forced closure of Mosillo to investors, according to the Los Angeles Times. Inside Countrywide, however, Mosillo was not sanguine. In the spring of 2006, he wrote an email describing Countrywide's 18-20% subprime loan on the most dangerous product in existence, and there can be nothing more toxic. Around the same time, Mosillo sent another email saying that it had personally observed a serious lack of confidence within our origination system. It relates to the documentation and generally and deterioration in the quality of the loans originated versus the pricing on those loans. He clearly seemed worried. The discrepancy between worry and a public proclamation will later cause the SEC to charge Mosillo and several of his top eyes with fraud for not disclosing Countrywide's growing risks to investors. In Mosillo's case, the government also charged him with insider trading for November 2006 through August 2007. For he got total proceeds is almost $1 million for cashing in stock auction. There is a little question that the money and the accolades had come to matter too much to Mosillo, and yet it's unclear when Mosillo was trying to decide Countrywide investor and whether he was so desperate to win the market share battle that he simply couldn't see the ultimate cost and the balance Countrywide was making. He reminded quite simply the trust and true believers within this company and this trust and virtue on subprime loans Countrywide made. He used to say that if 10% of subprime borrowers default, that means 90% were paying their mortgage on time. Every last one on the time of borrowers who wouldn't have otherwise had a shot on the American dream. Angelo, he totally believes, a former executive. He'd say, when I took a however in the eye, I can tell if the eye apply. We'll say, Angelo, we don't even do a personal interview anymore. We'll just stop saying you can see in their eyes. Yes, Mosillo Saul Countrywide was making some risky loans But what he didn't see, what he couldn't see was that this launch could make his company every bit as vulnerable as competitor. He disparaged is you're a true believer. You can ignore things you shouldn't ignore. Say one former countrywide execute. That was Angelo Mosillo, proven another puts on the little differently. He's a great salesman, and great salesmen are other guys who get sold. Mosillo had long planned to retire from countrywide, and the end of 2006, he was approaching 70 years old, and he had been in the mortgage business. But in 2005, Mosillo began to feel better. As he regained his health, he became less sure he wanted to leave the company he often called his baby. Another executive recalls a conversation he had with a Corland around them. You realize around this company. Corland said to this person, Angelo doesn't know any on details. A few weeks later, this same executive that had in report referring to the ways in which countrywide headed and interested rate risks. He does in the daily ditch hedge, he really doesn't want to run to the company. Executives and countrywide noticed another change to decision had always come from Angelo and Stan. Now they come from Angelo and Stan Dave Sambol. Those in the Corland County increasingly marginalized was told, says one of them. You were always trying to say no. One former executive recalls hearing Corland voice rise and angry, coming from his office during an apparent argument with Sambol. The culture, which had been took to begin with, became a culture of intimidation. Say another executes. A turning point for the execute when he saw his anger. The 6-foot former San Diego Chargers offensive lineman who served at Sambol number 2, standing over McMurray countrywide chief rate officer for waiting. Apart to this person, your chief ranks who should be the most respected person in the organization. Another former executive says, recalling the incident. Essentially, Corland outlined a structure in which he would be running this company, and Mosillo would assume the classic role on the ex-founder, non-executive chairman on the board, and honorific with no power. Corland says one person was even reluctant to have Mosillo continue as the company's spokesperson on CNBC. The memo led to a bitter and childish fight between two men, one that consumed inordinate amounts of everyone's energy. Mosillo was deployed often, and the ester guys. When Corland tried to apologize, Mosillo refused to accept it. There's no way I deserve this after a 30-year relationship. Corland to one person. Increasingly, Corland felt like he was fighting a losing battle on two fronts. According to someone he confided in, a period of torture is how this person says he described Corland's science countrywide after the feud began, and the Fed continued to increase interest rates. It didn't so 17 times in a row between June 2004 and June 2006. Corland became increasingly worried about the housing market. But within the company, he and others who feel like they were the chicken littles. Corland, according to another person, also agreed with countrywide supervision at the Federal Reserve, which oversaw the holding company. Kurland told a confidant that he didn't think he could win a battle for a contract with Mozilla because the board was in the founder's pocket. But doing so would have required cutting a deal with that symbol, Dave Sambol, and giving him more control. The Corland wanted him to have. Maybe I not could throw a no, Corland said at one point. Finally, Corland reshaped his limit according to the executive who watched the feud play out. The entire company had become obsessed with what some called the battle of the two. It was distracting the company needed to the focusing in energy of the housing market to the external soap opera. Curland to the Mozilla that the standard didn't it would destroy to the company. Although no one on to the outside knew it, by the spring of 2006, Curland was essentially an out countrywide management. By the summer, people who pay attention to the countrywide were starting to realize that something was up. I was in Denver with Angelo, recalls on the one analyst. We were riding in the car, and Mozilla said something to me about how unique Sambal was. That he had technical knowledge, plus he was an excellent salesman. The comment came out of the blue. It wasn't asking about Sambal. It began to wonder why he was sharing me this. What Sambal is the running. He was in September 2006, just after two American banker grabbed Mozilla in his lifetime achievement award. Countrywide announced that Stan Corland was leaving the company and Sambal would replace him president and COO. Mozilla would stay on COO until 2009, by which time he would by 71. Corland's departure was the culmination of the estrangement that he developed between the two men who had worked together for 3 decades. Corland left without so much as a good by email to the staff or an arbitrary each other friend that he didn't see the point in pretending otherwise. One former countrywide executive recalled explaining to Mozilla why Sambal was the wrong choice. I tried to get Angelo to appreciate where Sambal was coming from. I said he's not strategic and he's not long-term. Angelo would use stare blinking back at me, but to anyone who thought about it, there wasn't really a big mystery as to why Mozilla had fallen so hard for Sambal. Sambal was a salesman, just like Mozilla. Sambal created market share just like Mozilla. He was passionate about countrywide. He was a believer. With Sambal as a president, he didn't have to turn over to the reins on the company to anyone else, not just yet. What's more, with Sambal and his number 2 Mozilla could avoid having to face the hard choice that needed to be made. Sambal didn't seem to want to play defense, even if that's what the company needed. At Supreme Magnus, prior interest rates continued their ascent in the spring of the 2006. He told investors were extremely competitive in the trial and the desire to win, and we have a particularly focus on the offense. A few months before Corland officially left, Mozilla had sent an email to Sambal, CFO Eric Sierraki, another executive. It could have been written by 2 different people. He began to the email with the amount to the acknowledgement of reality. As we are all aware, STAN has begun a major undertaking to assure that we reduce mainline spans as rapidly as possible as to be reduced less in concert with expect revenue reduction from our production division. It continued. I want to you examine our risk profile, but then he won it up. He applied where he really was. By the way, he wrote. He must continue the growth of the safe halls and the other business that the key Tom Lagan creation, particularly in the origination channels. So many as warned to the early depart about the risky, some made so reckless behavior they engaged in. He continued throwing money around like Paris Hilton and selling products they don't really know or understand. And the song of na 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 eight goodbye. Fight to the room he had. There was a bright side to depositing Wamus, biggest rival. Some really scary and dangerous people won't be on the street anymore. This was fiction, of course, and the time to play Countrywide was the biggest mortgage lender in the country, but the point was this. Within the industry, it wasn't any secret to the Countrywide was out on the edge on the mortgage market. Even if Mozilla himself didn't want to believe it, everyone which was doing plenty on this risky landing, and now to the eventually bring down could see the X taking place to the Countrywide. And Countrywide is with other mortgage originators. There had been at the race moment and the sanity right before and the American settlement was announced. According to the Wall Street Journal, Countrywide was going to make it its tower for wherever to qualify for a 1% teaser rate on the if option REMs. Internally, Corland was pushing for that according to the former executive. The company also issued to the taxation police in early. Once Corland was officially at the door, Sambal began taking the control. The Countrywide, one of the first things he did was the sidelines on other company governance structures such as the Executive Risk Committee. According to a former executive under Corland, to the protocol had always been to meet Rowley a half dozen times a year. It met once every meeting. After that, there was counsel that developed operational excellence and overview their own intellect, says another former executive. What's more, no sooner had Corland left at Sambal and Mozilla decided to switch regulator, shooting to the OCC and defeat on the OTS. This move is one of the places where they made a terrible mistake, says a former executive, having defeated on the OCC regulate the company cap on a bit of the halo effect. They disappeared when it moved out to the OTC and really insulting the feed by cutting the regulatory core was hardly a smart move. You could do state documentation loan only if you were self-employed. Countrywide did not have either interest-only loans on the 18-20% loans in its approval line by 2006. However, some prime borrowers could get a loan to 1 million. The maximum loan to value ratio was by the percent. The only qualification for doing a state income loan was that you were a web earner. Countrywide now offering interest only loans to the borrowers with FICO scores. A result, 36% of the Countrywide some prior origination were done on state documentation basis. They put it another way is what hard to imagine anyone who wouldn't qualify for a Countrywide subprime loan during to the final truth on the housing bubble. in a lawsuit that would later be filed by the Mortgage Guarantee Insurance Corporation, which had insured Countrywide loans. Investigators went back and dug on the details on some loans Countrywide had made during the subprime bubble. One loan mortgage warranty investigate made to a woman in Chicago who was supposedly earning per month an employee on an auto body shop. What is an example of a borrower pointing to the wall over the age of the loan officer? Not exactly, but the borrower reported to the MGAC that she disclosed her true employment, her actual income, and her intention to hold her family purchase to property to loan officer. The loan officer told she could pose as a front buyer of time mortgage financing for her sister and brother-in-law and avoid personal responsibility for the loan. When the loan officer learned that she was a friend and the son of a man who owned an auto body shop, she helped prepare a document for the man to sign stating her employment and the monthly income. Then she forged the man's signature. Another borrower was supposed to a dairy farmer making a month. He was really a milker, and they were earning a 1/10 of that amount and buying the house for this unrated scheme. The loan officer, according to the lawsuit, to hail that he will be lending your sole credit and will not be responsible for the monthly payments. The borrower, who didn't speak, simply signed a word to the loan officer to tell him. According to the mortgage guarantee lawsuit, by about 2006, Countrywide external rights assessor knew that in the substantial number of the state income loans, fully a third borrower overstayed income by more than 50%. Countrywide also knew that many appraisers were overstating property values to drive origination by making loans appear less risky. Countrywide deliberately disregarded this and the other signs frauds in order to increase market share. But those prime loans were the only thing increased the risk drastically, and Countrywide in the xenophrenic in May Mozilla had sent back in May. He also wrote that we must pay special attention to HELOCs and pay auction when interest rates are continuing to rise on only by the hollow he'll become increasingly toxic as for pay auction the banks face potentially unexpected loss become higher rates will cause the loan to reset much earlier than they anticipate and here result causing mortgagor to default to the substantial increase in their payments. Like other mortgage originators, Countrywide keep the risky piece on the securitization. The residual was in on-balance sheet. Current policy had been to preserve some prime loans. The argument being that if you couldn't sell to whole thing, that you should make the loan with a former executive say the chain. Another former executive recalls arguing to Dre Gissinger that she assets were risky and that the value at which Countrywide was booking them was inflated. Gissinger disagreed. These were high quality assets, he said, but that is everyone pays. This executive response. By the end 2006, Countrywide had $2.8 billion was receivable on the balance sheet, representing about 50% of the Countrywide quality equity. The company International Enterprise Risk Assessment Map. In the spring of the 2005, Curland argued to the Countrywide was taken on too much balance. She risks in home equity loans according to the SEC, but the number just went higher by the end 2006. Countrywide had more than 20 billion worth of home equity loans in the book, almost double 2004 level, and while Courtland had entered into hedge with Wall Street firms offsetting the risks is the value of the residual decline. Those hedge has removed once he was pushed aside, according to the one former executive. After all, by early 2007, they were in the money and you could book a gain. It wasn't supposed to about the gain, says one former executive. It was hedge. Finally, Countrywide was putting paid auction REMs in a balance sheet instead of selling them on the Wall Street. By the end of the 2006, Countrywide had 32.7 billion worth of paid auction REMs on the balance sheet, and from just 4.7 billion at the end of the 2004. As Mozilla later wrote in an email to Sambol and Sierraki, we have no way, with any reasonable certainty, to assess the real risks on the holding desk, alone and our balance sheet. There were some inside Countrywide who worried the risks weren't being adequately disclosed to the investor. The same will later share that the through 2006, McMurray unsuccessfully lobbied to the Financial Reporting Department to the Countrywide disclosure more information about its increasing credit risks, but the disclosures were not made in the early 2007. McMurray provided Sambol another with an outline and where it was likely to suffer loss. He asked that that version of the outline be included in the company years and financial report. It wasn't according to the SEC that year. He again argued to the company should disclose its recommended underwriting guidelines to investors. According to the SEC, Sierraki and Sambol made the decision not to include McMurray's concern about the underwriting guidelines in the company financial report, but it doesn't seem like McMurray exactly laid his body across to the crowd either. He later said in the deposition that he was comfortable after discussing his issues with Annie McMillan. Countrywide deputy CF McCallion, for his part, said that there were disclosures that were contained in the document that addressed the substance of his comments. But whether Countrywide was under legal obligation to disclose more is almost beside to the point. It was particularly important for a company like Countrywide that the market not get any nasty surprise, because Countrywide lived and died on the market. Confidence in it, like in the non-bank mortgage originator, Countrywide relied on cash from sales on the loans and from selling equity and debt. To fund itself, Countrywide also relied to the ability to place in mortgage collateral for loans in the overnight repo market. In fact, Countrywide was even more reliant on this funding source because it also kept the right to service mortgage that it made, which is valued in the 60.2 billion and the 2006. Courtland had planned on this as a way to ensure that Countrywide could service a market downturn caused by rising interest rates. The ongoing payment for certain mortgage were supposed to provide a cushion in year when the company could make the many mortgages, but it meant the Countrywide got less cash in the door upfront. The risks on the Countrywide depends on the market could be mitigated. It is worth tightly managed, which explains why Corland worried so incessantly about the operational aspect and the business, but the more lands and the residuals that were put on countrywide balance sheet, the harder the risk and the was to manage. In other words, if the market ever got spoken about countrywide house, is an investor regard to the question to the value on the residual on the lots of the countrywide balance sheet instead of on the supply on cash, countrywide could be in jeopardy. Says another analyst, I told Angelo that he's a shields. He was pounding in his typical way. Angelo say, you're all wrong.